So we are continuing with the stages of the French Revolution. We have finished the Estates General Meeting, which was the first event or stage of the revolution. We can call it event, we can call them stages, we can refer to it as the course, but it's very important in understanding the history of Europe because the French Revolution is key in shaping the history of Europe, and it also helps us understand the events that followed thereafter. So, following the failure of the SS General Meeting, remember all the SS were there. The third class members who realized that the first and second class members were not willing to accept their demands, to accept their quest for reforms, for changes in France so that France could be rejuvenated, could be revived, the economy could be helped to come back to shape again. They decided to form what we call the National Assembly on 17th June 1789. And they declared that they were the representatives. They declared that they were the representatives of the people. Representatives of the people, representatives of the nation. Representatives of the nation. Now, under normal circumstances, you are not going to find some of these steps in the books, but I want to just break down how the course of the revolution moved. The National Assembly was formed shortly after the failure of the Estates General Meeting. When it failed, the third class members chose to secede. To secede is to break away. They said, okay, since the Bourbon monarch or the current government is not willing to bring about reform, we are forming our own government, our own wing, which they refer to as the National Assembly. And here they declared again that they were the representatives of the people. Count Mirabeau, who was one of the leaders of the revolution, became the leader, you can say the president of the National Assembly. And then from that time onwards, the National Assembly began guiding events in Europe, in France, not Europe, began guiding events, making decisions on how things should be done, and the events that followed thereafter, it was a making of the National Assembly. So what is very key about this is that when the National Assembly was formed, it is like France had now two governments. That there was the Bourbon monarch, which was of course led by the nobles and the clergy, that had failed to accept reforms during the Estates General Meeting. So that kind of, that wing of government was there. And then now, those who were protesting, the oppressed group that was saying we need change, and the change that they wanted was not accepted during the Estates General Meeting, they formed their own wing, which we are referring to as the National Assembly, their own government. They seceded, they broke off the Bourbon monarch and formed their own government. Now at this stage, France was having two governments. And you can basically say that it was almost explaining, or it would only be a question of time as to when the Bourbon monarch would collapse, because by the time another group, which is even bigger than the ruling government, the oppressed group, which was bigger than the ruling government, had formed its own wing, its own government, which they refer to as the National Assembly. It was a question of time as to when the Bourbon monarch would collapse. So the National Assembly began guiding events thereafter. It was led by Count Mirabeau and other revolutionary leaders, as we are going to find out. What followed after the National Assembly? Because when the Estates General Meeting failed, when it failed, they declared themselves the National Assembly, but they had agreed to come back on the 20th so that the discussions could continue. But when they returned, this one was formed 17th June, that is the National Assembly. The Estates General Meeting is 5th May, still 1789. Now, on the 20th, when they returned, they found that the gate to the main hall had been closed with an excuse that it was under renovation. Now, they moved to a nearby tennis court. 20th June. 1789. Dennis Scott Oath. So when they came and found that the gates to the to the main hall had been closed, who are those who came? The third class members, because during the first event, which is the SS General Meeting, discussion did not arrive at a conclusion. There was no consensus. So they were supposed to meet again and continue with the discussion. But remember, the third class members had already formed the National Assembly. But that said, they were still willing to arrive at a conclusion with the members of the first and the second class. So when they came on the agreed date, they found out that the main hall gates had been closed, so they were not allowed to enter. These kind of events have happened even in the modern history, even in Uganda, if I can refer to Uganda, but that's not for reference today. But these things have happened where you are not allowed to access a premise because of a reason given by the ruling government. So the third class members were not allowed to enter the main hall. What they did, they moved to a nearby tennis court. And at the tennis court, they made an oath. And that's why it is called the tennis court oath. And it was a very major event. They made an oath, and in brief, it was that they would not separate. They would not separate until France is granted a constitution. Until France is granted a constitution. They were going to stay together. They were going to remain united. They were going to remain one body because they were calling for one. They had one voice. We want reforms. We want a constitution. We are tired of dictatorship. So they made an oath and said, we will not accept to be intimidated. We shall not accept to be oppressed. We shall not accept this kind of dictatorship anymore. We shall not allow the poor taxation system because there are no guiding laws. We don't have any principles we are following, and therefore we are here by the will of the people, and we shall only separate if France is granted a constitution. But without it, we shall not accept. Therefore, they were demanding for constitutionalism here. There are two things we can deduct from here: the demand for constitutionalism and the unity, the determination, the togetherness of the Frenchmen, as we shall find out later when it comes to why the revolution succeeded. Now, when the king realized that the revolutionaries were very serious and the revolution had already started and out of hand, he could no longer control the third class members. He decided to call a royal session. A royal session, 23rd June 1789. In brief, during the royal session, he called upon the first and second class members. He called upon the first and second class members to accept and convene with the third class members. Accept and conduct a session, conduct a meeting, conduct a discussion with the third class members, and also grant a constitution, to the Frenchmen, which of course they accepted. And this was a triumph, this was victory, this was a win for the third class members, because now the first and second class had started accepting their demands. So during the royal session, the king requested that they accept the third class members to join them, grant them a constitution. But he also said that the National Assembly that had been formed by the revolutionaries, and in this case the revolutionaries that I'm referring to are the third class members, because they were the ones who were revolting against the government. So we refer to them as the revolutionaries. He declared that the National Assembly that they had formed was illegal and therefore should be dissolved, should be dispersed, which of course the third class members could not accept. And in that regard, he planned to use foreign forces together with his army, which was called the Royal Guard or the Royal Army, to disperse the National Assembly. And when they learned about that, they decided to storm Bastille where they believed that it was full of guns, it was an armory, and also to release some of their friends who had been arrested and imprisoned using the letters de cachet. So they decided to storm Bastille, acquire guns so that they can protect themselves against the king's plan to disperse and destroy the National Assembly. So, moving on from the royal session, again a recap so that we have the connection. First, we have the Estates General meeting which failed, and after failing, the third class members decided to form a National Assembly so that they can bring about reform in their country. And when they did so, the king panicked. The king panicked and closed the gate because he was fearful of what they could do. Therefore, when they returned on the agreed date, which is in this case 20th June 1789, they found that the main hall had been closed, so they moved to a tennis court, and at the court they made an oath where they decided that they would never separate until France is granted a constitution. They would always convene as circumstances dictate until France was granted a constitution. Now from there, the king panicked after seeing the seriousness of the third class members, the seriousness of the revolutionaries, and decided to call a royal session on 23rd June. In the royal session, he called upon the nobles and the clergy to accept the demands of the third class members, convene a meeting together, grant them a constitution, but also demanded that the National Assembly be dispersed. If they don't do so, he will disperse the National Assembly using foreign forces.